fourth quarter regulatory update for 2011. My name is Ann Wilkie. I'm the Senior Regulatory Strategy and Policy Advisor for Dicentra, and it's my pleasure to be your presenter today. As part of Dicentra's commitment to the growth and prosperity of the natural health products industry, we are very happy to be able to provide these regulatory update webinars free of charge to all interested stakeholders. Before we get started on our webinar today, we'd just like to announce our GMP online training that we have just recently launched. This online training is a very easy 4-step process. You just sign up, watch the video, take the quiz, and receive your certificate. The training program is based on version 2.0 of the Good Manufacturing Practices Guidance document released by the Natural Health Products Directorate in 2006. This is a company-based program with an annual membership that gives your employees unlimited access to the video training. So please visit the website for more information. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get set. As with the other webinars, there will be no question and answer. We apologize for this, but we have a very large number of participants on the line for any given webinar, so it's not feasible. There will be a satisfaction survey. Again, as we mentioned, we are offering these services free of charge to you, and we would appreciate your input to let us know how we're doing. So about halfway through the webinar, you will see a link on the right-hand side of your page that will take you to the survey. So we would appreciate it very much if you would complete that for us. As well, a recording of the webinar and all links mentioned in the webinar will be posted on our website, www.dicentra.com, within the next few days. So again, the objectives of our webinar are to provide you with up-to-date information pertaining to the implementation and interpretation of the Natural Health Products Regulations in Canada. As well, this also will encompass the UPLAR, or the Natural Health Products Unprocessed Product License Application Regulations, as that is the other regulatory framework we are complying with these days. As well, to provide you with other scientific and regulatory information that has relevance to the natural health products industry. And today that information will be largely on the food side. You can see what's happening over there. And also, a new addition is to provide you with unique perspectives on current regulatory issues through invited guests. And today we're very pleased to be able to have Mr. Michael McGuffin of the American Herbal Products Association as our guest speaker. And we'll be hearing from Michael later on in the presentation. So today's webinar is going to be a little bit different than previous ones. We are nearing the end of 2011, so what we're going to do in today's webinar is, again, look at the Canadian environment for natural health products, specifically regulatory and policy changes that have occurred within the last quarter. But then we thought we'd have a look back at 2011, see what happened, see if there are any trends, and then see if we can have a look in 2012, look into our crystal ball and see if we can forecast what may come to the natural health products industry in the next year. And then, as mentioned, Mr. Michael McGuffin will speak about the regulatory environment in the United States, and then we'll conclude our webinar. So again, just briefly with the current regulatory environment, we've gone over this numerous times. We're working under the Natural Health Products Regulations, the Natural Health Products Unprocessed Product License Application Regulations. We're trying to comply with these regulations, though still finding challenges with getting our natural product numbers, or DNHMs, for homeopathic medicines, still being faced with changing product and ingredient status, IRNs, information request notices, and unfortunately refusals. So there's a lot of things going on. There are some performance standards in place, but largely with the products that have exemption numbers, there are no performance standards other than 2013. So there's a lot going on within the regulatory environment, but also a lot that's not changing as we'd like it to. So if we go in and look specifically at product and ingredient information, what's changed within the last quarter? Again, we still have product categories on hold, these being weight loss, weight management products, natural health products in food format, and aromatherapy products. We did see some movement, and we'll talk about this as well, We did see enzymes, probiotics, and energy beverages move off the on-hold category, not necessarily in the direction, again, that we would have liked to have seen them go, but they are no longer on hold. So it will remain to be seen what will happen with these remaining categories. So again, just a reminder that even though these applications are in queue, you are still eligible for an exemption number if you do not meet the risk criteria. So at our last webinar, actually on the very day of our last webinar, the Minister of Health was making an announcement about energy beverages and the direction that they were going to be taking with the regulation of energy beverages. What the Minister had done was convened an expert panel on caffeinated energy drinks. The panel had written the report and given it to the Minister. You can find a copy of the report at this web link. It was quite interesting because the advisory panel came out very strongly against having energy beverages as foods. They said as a minimum they should be kept as natural health products, and really they should be viewed as drugs. And again, the panel was quite adamant that these were really not, that the term energy beverages was confusing. These were definitely not food products, and really what they should be called were stimulant drug-containing drinks. So a very strong position put forward by the expert panel. So quite interesting to see how the Minister of Health looked at the report, took their recommendations, and then in essence went the opposite directions. So they have definitively said that energy beverages will now be considered to be foods unless they're in a single dose format. So unless they're a shot, so shots of energy drinks, single dose format, will remain as natural health products, whereas the ones that are in larger containers will be considered to be foods. So really what is confusing, though, is nowhere along the line have they defined what an energy beverage is. Is it just by virtue that they contain caffeine, or are there other reasons for determining it to be an energy beverage? So really, as they move forward in this transition, which they have stated will start November 1st, they really need to define for the industry what an energy beverage is. So again, as mentioned, it is quite interesting to see this move to the food category, especially when the expert panel had identified several risks with the consumption of these products and unlimited consumption of them. So if we just look in general, if you're in the food category, and you can take these pros as cons or vice versa, but right now there is no product or site licensing requirements for food. So if you're an energy beverage, you don't have to deal with the product license application process. You don't have to have a site license for your manufacturing, packaging, labeling, or importing. Though that will change, as you can see further on in the slides, there are some importing licensing requirements coming on the food side. As well, there's typically less onerous cautions and warnings on food products. Food products typically are to be consumed ad libitum, so there should not be any extensive warnings and contraindications, as we've seen with the natural health products. Even for vitamin and mineral addition on the natural health product side, you still have several cautions and warnings. The advertising restrictions, again, foods, as long as you're consistent with the message that is approved for a food, you're okay. You don't need to wait for a product license or an exemption number, as is the case with a natural health product. The other possible pro as to being a food are the food GMPs. Again, they are based more sanitation. GMPs, you still need recall procedures, you need pest control programs, complaint systems, but these are not regulated GMPs as they are with the natural health products. So there are some definite benefits to being a food product. However, on the other side, there are definitely some reasons why you may not want to be considered a food. And largely that is the regulation of vitamins, minerals, and amino acids to food. There are very strict guidelines as to which foods can contain which added vitamins and minerals. And right now, energy beverages per se are not allowed to have any vitamins, minerals, or amino acids added to them. So these are policies that are all going to have to be developed by the Food Directorate as they move forward. Again, herbal extracts in food, this again is a very difficult area to pin down what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, so that will need to be addressed as they move forward. The other thing in terms of composition would be the food additives. So they would be considered to be non-medicinal ingredients as a natural health product, but as a food, you would have food additives, so coloring agents, thickeners, emulsifying agents, pH adjusting, etc. Those are all considered to be food additives, and it's very prescriptive, again, in terms of which food additives can be used in which foods and for what functions. So there will be some challenges in terms of formulating these products to comply with the food regulations. Again, limited claims. There are some structure function claims associated with vitamin minerals that you can use on food products. If you look at energy, typically a claim for energy on a food product is associated with the caloric intake. So again, there's a fairly large distinction between energy used on energy beverages as a natural health product and that as a food. And again, the food labeling is much more prescriptive than the natural health product labeling. You will require a nutrition facts panel, allergen labeling, etc. So there's a lot of things that still need to be clarified as they move forward with energy beverages, and they've outlined an 18-month transition beginning November 1st. However, there was still consultation with stakeholders that was open until the end of November. So challenges moving forward with energy beverages as foods. Other things that we saw change, the oil of oregano. We talked about this extensively in the last webinar, that the Natural Health Products Directorate had identified gaps in terms of the evidence for safety of oil of oregano. So we saw the existing level of use for oil of oregano as a non-medicinal ingredient reduced substantially over the last few months, and the NHPD, the Natural Health Products Directorate, requesting additional safety information. However, there is nothing new. We have not found anything here at Dicentra, anything new in the publicly available data. Some companies may have come up with proprietary information to substantiate safety and efficacy for their products, but in the public domain, there's limited new evidence, if any. So we've not seen any refusals yet for safety, but we have seen refusals because of lack of evidence for efficacy. So we're expecting something to come out from the Natural Health Products Directorate shortly. Hopefully we'll see some revised levels, some increase in the acceptable levels of use of oil of oregano as a non-medicinal ingredient and a medicinal ingredient. This one is actually quite interesting in terms of synephrine and caffeine. There have been a large number of publications, U.S.-based publications, talking about revised levels of synephrine and caffeine published by Health Canada. Unfortunately, I've not been able to confirm this either on the Health Canada website or through the Natural Health Products Directorate. So I will just put this out for you, and once we get it confirmed one way or the other, we will let you know. But back in January of 2010, Health Canada did publish guidelines on the use of synephrine and caffeine with a maximum of 30 milligrams per day of synephrine allowed in a product. And in terms of using synephrine and caffeine in a combination product, you would require extensive clinical data in humans to substantiate the safety. And as well, a duration of use was required, so consult a healthcare practitioner beyond 8 weeks. So that's the existing policy that sits on the Health Canada website and is reflected in the Natural Health Products Ingredient Database. But what it's saying in publications in the U.S. and the natural products side, the dietary supplement side, is that now Health Canada is allowing 40 milligrams of synephrine in combination with 320 milligrams of caffeine without having to provide any clinical data. They're talking about cautionary labeling with products with greater than 50 milligrams of synephrine to the effect that these products should be avoided by children, pregnant and nursing women, those taking blood pressure and or thyroid medications, those on sympathetic mimetics or monoamine oxidase inhibitors. So as I say, we've yet to confirm that there has been a change in position, though there is a lot of information on the internet to that effect. So we'll keep you posted. This again would be something of interest primarily in the weight loss sector. Synephrine has been identified as a thermogenic agent. So if we move on from ingredients and products and look at some of the policies or guidance that's come out in the last quarter, there was a document just reflecting Health Canada's position on nanotechnology-based health products and foods. Again, nanotechnology, the wordy definition, it's the application of scientific knowledge to manipulate and control matter in the nanoscale, the nanoscale being 1 to 100 nanometers inclusive. And this is to make use of the size and structure-dependent properties and phenomenon that are distinct from those associated with the individual atoms or molecules or with bulk materials. So looking at very small particles and the properties associated with that. So Health Canada is basically saying that there's no regulations currently specific to nanotechnology or nanomaterials. The general guidance would be found under the Food and Drugs Act and regulations relating to safety of products and misleading advertising. So it's the responsibility of the applicant to self-identify. So if you have a natural health product or a cosmetic or a drug using nanotechnology, it's up to you to start the discussions with Health Canada and the appropriate department to bring forward the information that you have and discuss how to proceed. So again, as I say, this is just general information put out there, looking to encourage applicants to come forward and request pre-submission meetings with the appropriate department. And then based on those meetings, the type of information that may be requested from Health Canada would be things such as the use of the product, the manufacturing process, its identity, composition, purity, toxicological data, risk assessment, and risk management strategies. And again, it can be noted that even though the nanoscale is defined as 1 to 100 nanometers, Health Canada could request companies using particles up to 1,000 nanometers to provide specific safety data as well. Something else that came out from the Natural Health Products Directorate in the last quarter were instructional videos. These videos have been provided to give applicants an overall understanding of the electronic tools available to them as part of the Natural Health Products online solution. So there's instructions on how to use these various electronic tools and forms. So there's instructional videos, for example, for the Natural Health Products ingredient database, and then on the Natural Health Products ingredient database issue form, so how to get changes made, whether additions of non-medicinal ingredients or medicinal ingredients or changes in names, etc. How to use the electronic product license application form, the EPLA, which Natural Health Products Directorate is encouraging all stakeholders to begin the move towards and eventually have everybody use the electronic PLA. Videos on the finished product specification forms, on the e-submission builder. And again, these videos can all be found at the link identified there. So moving on, for once I can say there weren't a lot of changes in the natural health product side, but there are a couple of interesting ones that have been occurring on the food side. The first is the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's Imported Food Regulatory Proposal. This is coming as part of the Food and Consumer Safety Action Plan that was announced a couple of years ago. And the objective of this is really to strengthen controls for the importation of non-federally registered commodities. So within the food side, there are commodities such as meat, fish that are regulated. There are specific requirements from Health Canada, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, what used to be Fisheries and Oceans Canada, now under Canadian Food Inspection Agency for licensing requirements. But there are other commodities which they're referring to as the non-federally registered commodities that do not have any controls, specific regulatory controls over their importation. So we're looking at things such as cereals, confectionery, alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages, fats and oils, coffee and tea, infant formula, bakery products, spices and seasonings, and as well energy beverages would fall under this category. So if you are importing energy beverages, this is coming down the pipe. And again, the rationale behind this, they're saying that over 70% of food products sold in Canada are imported, and then most domestically manufactured products as well contain imported ingredients. So it's important to note that this initiative applies to both finished products and ingredients that are being imported. So it has a fairly wide scope. So again, the objectives are to better identify and engage regulated parties importing food products and ingredients in the non-federally registered sector, to enhance verification of compliance with food safety requirements, and to minimize the risk of unsafe products entering the Canadian marketplace. So again, this proposal has been put out to stakeholders. There's been a number of consultations. The comments have all been collected and they're being summarized, and now the Canadian Food Inspection Agency is just out there talking to stakeholders saying this is how we plan to move forward. So the regulatory proposal contains two sections, one general provisions and one on licensing provisions. So in terms of the general provisions, this will establish minimum food safety and labeling requirements for imported food products, and will also put the onus on the importer to have recall plans, to maintain records, and to notify the CFIA of unsafe food that may be coming into the country. As well, this regulatory amendment will go under the Canada Agricultural Products Act, the CAPS Act, because what they intend to do with this, the licensing provisions, et cetera, cannot be accomplished under the Food and Drugs Act. So again, this is something else that companies, typically if you're importing cereals or breads, you're only dealing with the Food and Drugs Act and food regulations. Now, as an importer, you will have to be aware of the responsibilities under the Canada Agricultural Products Act as well. As well, there's going to be licensing provisions. So it will be mandatory for anyone importing in the imported food sector. So that's the terminology for those outside of the federally registered sector. It will be the imported food sector. You will require a license to import products into Canada. It will be available online, so you just have to go onto the internet, into the CFIA's website, fill in the appropriate data, and get a license. They're looking at a couple of days turnaround time if all goes well, but there will be a 2-year renewal cycle. So again, a requirement to develop and maintain a preventative food safety control program. And again, the objectives of this food safety control plan are to reduce the risk of food being unsafe and unfit for human consumption, and to provide consumer protection by ensuring foods are safe and properly labeled. Again, at this point in time, there's no proposal for audits in order to obtain a license, so similar to what we see with the Natural Health Products Directorate, though definitely not as extensive of licensing requirements as are seen for NHPs. So basically an online paperwork exercise to get your license. They are targeting May of 2012 to publish this regulatory proposal in Canada Gazette Part 1. And the usual question about fees, there are no fees proposed at the moment, but as with all regulatory activities, you can be assured fees will come, but this will be, again, through a consultation process. The other initiative that's coming out of the Food Director, they recently published a guidance document for preparing a health claim submission using an existing systematic review. So this was published in 2011. And again, the objective of this was to help streamline the health claim submission process. So if a company had already put in a submission under EFSA, under the European Food Safety Authority, for either an Article 14 or a 13.5 health claim, you could use that similar submission and put it into Health Canada. Now, you still have to do some additional work. You still have to format it to the Health Canada requirements. You also have to do an update of the literature to make sure you've got everything in there, that there hasn't been any new data presented. But basically, you can use the bones and the content of that submission in terms of submitting a health claim to Health Canada. So it will help to speed up the process a little bit. So again, this identifies under what regulatory body and what type of health claim submission would be acceptable to Health Canada. So you're looking at Food Standards Australia, New Zealand, submissions for high-level health claims. You could use that same document with some revisions in submitting a health claim to the Food Directorate. As mentioned, EFSA with the Article 14 and 13.5 health claim petitions. You can use the Cochrane collaboration and Cochrane reviews as the basis for your health claim submission, as well the World Cancer Research Fund, American Institute for Cancer Research, and these would be, again, systematic literature reviews. The Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, evidence-based practice center evidence reports, and again, this information in the guidance document can all be found at the website identified there. So this is a step in the right direction in terms of trying to streamline the process and make it more efficient and to avoid duplication of effort. There was also a webinar presented by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada on health claims. This was presented on November 17th, 2011. Some of you may have participated in it. It was called Health Claims for Food, an International Perspective. A very good webinar with speakers from the United States, Australia, and Canada, all speaking about the health claim process in their various jurisdictions. And again, the Canadian representative talked about this recent guidance document and the use of systematic reviews. So even if you weren't present on November 17th, you can still go to this website. You can listen to a podcast. You can replay the slides, download the slides, and all the references and links for supporting materials are also available there. So well worth having a look at if you are interested in the food side and health claims in particular. So just to take a quick look back at 2011 as we move into the end of the year, just some personal comments here. First one, personnel changes. Do they really make a difference? Well, we're on to, I think it's our third Director General now. Scott Soller came in at the end of 2010 as the new Director General for the Natural Health Products Directorate. We also saw Adam Gibson come in to replace John Boyer, who went back to medical devices. Adam is the Director of the Bureau of Product Review and Assessment. So does it make a difference? We see when changes in personnel occur, there seems to be a flurry of activity. Now, whether this is because of the new people or whether it just happens that these changes have been in place all along and the new person gets to take the gratitude, if any, for it. So it just, sometimes you wonder, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Does it make a difference who's really leading this ship? In terms of product licensing, in the last 4 quarters, the Natural Health Products Directorate has received 7,364 product license applications, so a fair number of either new products coming in or products that are being resubmitted to take advantage of the new performance standards. Of those 7,000 plus PLAs, the NHPD did issue 4,569 licenses, representing 7,560 products. So they're at a 62% licensing rate based on these stats, which is not too bad, and the ratio is 48% of applications adhering to PCI versus 52% attesting to non-PCI information. The other stat is that as of at the end of this year, last quarter, they'd completed 32.7% of the pre-UPLAR submissions. So they still have another 7,000 plus applications to be completed by February 2013. So these are just general information that was pulled from the quarterly reports. Sorry. Then if we move forward to these stats, this was information that was presented by Scott Soller at CHFA Expo East back in October. And this is the new Director General who seems to freely admit to mistakes being made by the Natural Health Products Directorate. So on one hand, we have to applaud him for his honesty, but on the other hand, I'm not sure it makes us feel too comfortable that they're admitting to mistakes. So his comments largely related to the efficiency of the department. He's saying in terms of the applications attesting to pre-cleared information, 75% of those applications actually end up with licenses versus 25% are refused. Now, if you look at applications that are attesting to non-PCI information, 75% of those are refused, and 25% are licensed. And the bulk of the applications would be found within that non-PCI category in general. In terms of pre-UPLAR applications, and again, these are Scott Soller's comments, he's saying the Natural Health Products Directorate is not on target to complete their review by February 2013, which is when the regulations are to be sunsetted. So that's something to keep in mind. If they're not on target, that's probably going to push off enforcement, compliance and enforcement action for a while and potentially get them to extend the deadline for the UPLAR regulations. Again, 87% of the applications, pre-UPLAR applications, do have exemption numbers. The others, the remaining 13%, would be either they meet risk criteria or the applicant did not wish to apply for an exemption number. Again, some more information, 70% of applications received are for multi-ingredient products, and I think we all know that. That's where the innovation is in combining new and unique ingredients. And 70% of licenses are issued for single ingredient products. So the balance tends to fall on, as you see, the PCI, that's where the bulk of the products are being licensed, and the single ingredient products are where most of the licenses are being issued. However, this is not really where the industry wants those numbers to be. Again, policy changes. We talked about the products that are on hold. We were anxious to see those products get off hold, but I don't think we were all that happy to see the results when those products, when decisions were made about the future of those products. Oil of oregano, again, we've talked about that. The ability to use it as a non-medicinal ingredient versus a medicinal ingredient, the lowering of the levels. Again, we're still waiting for a decision to come out to see what happens there. Enzymes and probiotics, again, Scott Soller freely admitted that the Natural Health Products Directorate had made a mistake when they were writing the probiotics monograph, and that the evidence that they reviewed did not support the claims that they put forth. So we've seen the probiotics graph rewritten and labeling standard for live microorganisms. So quite a shift in the directions for probiotics. The same with enzymes. Again, I think we were all quite surprised with the results of the review of enzymes and requirements for durations of use and additional safety and or efficacy information and labeling standards versus monographs. So changes coming that we didn't necessarily foresee. Again, the standards of evidence, which a lot of people seem to think is going to change everything and make our world a better place. The revised standards of evidence are to be due out in this month, actually. So I'm not sure if they're going to make it, and I don't think we're really going to see any big changes in the procedures in place for the standards of evidence. Again, Schedule F amendments, they've been ongoing. They were put on hold because of the federal election. We've told that they were to be published in Canada Gazette Part 2 in November, which has come and gone, and we're still waiting for those amendments. Some other comments in terms of policy changes, just looking at the impact of the food program. This may work both ways, particularly with probiotics. We saw the change in policy come from the Natural Health Products Directorate. However, it is being mimicked on the food side. So with the food program, you need strain-specific evidence as well. They're rethinking their acceptable species that they have for general probiotic claims. So I think we're going to see a bit more activity in terms of when something happens in either the food program, the fallout on the NHP program, or vice versa. The energy beverages, again, we've talked about this extensively. The point being, really, it's now a food, but there's going to need to be a lot of things, decisions made to incorporate energy beverages under the food category. The one thing that I neglected to mention is that with the energy beverages, if they don't comply with the food regulations immediately, there is the route of the temporary marketing authorization, which if you do get approval from the food directorate, will let you go to market with a non-compliant product, whether it's based on the composition or the labeling. It will give you a window of opportunity to put that product on the market and to collect data in support of a regulatory amendment. So we'll wait and see what happens with energy beverages, see what other categories are being transitioned to the food side. The role of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, again, I find this quite interesting. We talked about the webinar earlier that they put on about health claims. Agriculture's mandate is really to support and grow the Canadian agricultural industry. So they're definitely a promoter of it, and they are, over the last few years, have been quite active in trying to support industry and push Health Canada to make regulatory and policy changes to allow health claims, for example, or more innovation in product formulation. So I would say that Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada is definitely on our side in terms of helping to get regulatory changes. The other department is the Food and Drugs Act Liaison Office. Again, we're starting to see a bit more out of this office. They are to be sort of an independent body, someone you can go to if you're having challenges with dealing with the regulators. They say they're becoming more visible and they're pushing their services, and they do seem to be able to get resolution to some unusual situations. So again, watch what they do in terms of their activities. The other thing that I think we need to be looking at as well is the European Food Safety Authority. Rulings that are being made in Europe, not so much in the United States right now, but Europe and Australia, they do seem to be having an impact here in Canada. So keep your eyes open for that. Again, the site license applications, not too much here. We know we're going ahead with the risk-based site license assessment, looking at having on-site audits down the road to support a site license application and the renewal of that site license. Again, Michael Wiseman from the TGA has moved on to another assignment, but Matthew Bone of the inspectorate is going to be the new lead. So you can be confident that this initiative is going to move forward and continue to move forward, but again, the timelines as to when it'll be implemented, it still needs to become a regulatory proposal, be consulted on by stakeholders, be published in Canada Gazette Part 1 and Part 2. So it's moving forward, but there's still a lot that needs to be done in the interim. Compliance and enforcement in 2011, I think this says it all. It's on, it's off. We were looking at February 2011, then March 2011, and then according to Scott Soller in October, there is no fixed date for compliance and enforcement. And again, with the backlog with the pre-UPLAR applications and challenges with the licensing of the new applications that come in, I don't think compliance and enforcement is in the very near future. So just looking ahead to 2012, some of the things that the Natural Health Products Directorate is talking about, where they're going to be focusing their efforts, are on the need to reduce the pre-market burden and to be finding an appropriate balance between pre- and post-market burden, and that's the regulatory burden. So how much information do you need to submit before you get your license versus what you can submit after going to market? So this seems to be top of their mind. Sarah O'Connor has been picked to head a team to evaluate the product licensing process and to identify what they're calling value-added steps to the consumer. So that we may see some changes again in terms of the product license application process and requirements. The Natural Health Products Directorate, again, they need to get on top of their pre-UPLAR submissions, or they will be dealing with a request for an extension to the UPLAR regulations. And again, the success of PCI versus non-PCI applications. As we saw, the licenses that are being issued are weighted on the PCI side, whereas the majority of applications are for multi-ingredient products, which are going to fall on the non-PCI side. So Natural Health Products Directorate has a few things to look at moving forward. For industry, I think the main challenge really is how to differentiate your products in the marketplace. If the majority of products that are getting licensed are based on pre-cleared information, then it's going to be difficult to differentiate your product from your neighbors. So clinical trials, that's going to be definitely one of the ways to go. You need to be able to find a way to differentiate your product. And having a clinical trial, whether it's for safety for something like oil of oregano and keeping it on the market, or for a unique claim to associate with your product, that may be one of the ways to go. Again, something else to consider potentially is if you are able to move into the food category. And given what's coming down with the energy beverages, we may see more movement of products that initially thought they wanted to be natural health products, maybe rethinking it and going back to the food side. In terms of anticipating changes, again, we just talked about this, looking at what's going on in other departments. What's the food directorate doing? What's on their agenda for the coming year? As I say, with the probiotics, we saw the news come out of the Natural Health Products Directorate, but it was being mimicked by the Food Directorate. So they're definitely watching what everybody else is doing. Again, supportive efforts coming from Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. International impacts, as I say, people have always been worried about Codex. It's not Codex per se, but we do need to be aware of what's happening in other international regulatory jurisdictions. When they make a decision under EFSA about a health claim, you can be sure that the Food Directorate has read that ruling, and if you're trying to bring in a similar health claim in Canada, you'll need to address any deficiencies that were identified in the EFSA ruling. Again, the food-like NHPs, where are they going? The first step has been made with energy beverages. I think that'll start the precedent. These other food-like NHPs that are on hold, we'll probably start to see them transitioning over within the next year or so. I think if you do have a food like NHP, you should be looking at both sides of the fence, maybe putting it in as a natural health product, but also looking at the opportunity to maximize your marketing as a food. Again, compliance and enforcement. Be prepared. The more licenses you have under your belt, the better you'll be positioned when it does come. As I say, I think it's a ways off. But again, just be aware of other things, your marketing materials, your websites. And this is particularly for companies that have sister companies in the U.S., for example, where there's more liberal advertising on the Internet. Make sure you clearly distinguish your Canadian website from the U.S. website. So those are my comments for the natural health products industry for 2011 and 2012. Now we're going to move south of the border, and it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker for today, Mr. Michael McGuffin. Michael is the president of the American Herbal Products Association based in the United States. Michael was honored in 2010 for over 20 years of dedicated service, having served as the president of the American Herbal Products Association since 1999 and as a member of the Board of Trustees for 10 years prior. He has been active in the herbal industry since 1974 and has owned both retail and manufacturing businesses in the dietary supplement side. So I will turn it over to Michael to give us an update on what's happening in the United States. So Michael?
Thank you very much, Anne. And I do want to take just a moment to thank Dicentra for this opportunity. Dicentra is an APA member because they have activities both in the U.S. and Canada, and I do appreciate the chance to talk about this particular issue. My primary interest in being here today is really to call your attention to Proposition 65 if you are doing business in the state of California. If you're not, this law really has no impact on you, but I know that California is an important market for anybody that is marketing dietary supplement products or food products in the United States. And too often, the first time a company hears about Proposition 65 is when they receive a 60-day notice, and I'll get to some details on what that is. At that point, you probably have a $100,000 problem. So, again, my primary goal today is just to make you aware of the fact that this law exists. I am going to get into some details. I don't pretend that in 12 or 15 slides and in 12 or 15 minutes you can learn everything that there is to know about Proposition 65, but I'll give you the overview and give you enough information so that you can make good business decisions to address your compliance and manage your risk in this area. So the law, California Proposition 65, its formal name is the Safe Drinking Water and Toxic Enforcement Act. It was adopted as a ballot initiative in 1986. That means we, the people of the state of California, went to the voting booth and decided to make this the law. What it accomplished was it established that the state, and specifically the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment, is required to maintain a list of chemicals that are known to cause cancer or reproductive toxicity, and then it also requires a person doing business in the state to provide what are called clear and reasonable warnings for any discharge or exposure of any of those chemicals. What those last 2 points mean that if the state places a chemical on the list and the list is in your product, you have an obligation to provide a warning. It does not go so far as to say you have an obligation to remove the chemical. That's not the law's purpose. The law's purpose is to make sure that consumers are aware of the presence of chemicals in the environment or in products. A unique part of this law is that it's enforced either by the government, by the California Attorney General's office, or by private plaintiffs. Any person can act on behalf of the state in bringing an action against anyone that they believe is in violation. They don't actually have to show harm. We don't have to show that a product that contains one of these chemicals hurt anyone. They just have to show that the chemical is present. And then the burden is on the defendant once you are accused of the chemical being present in your product. The burden is on you to show that there was actually not a potential for harm, that there was not a potential for cancer-causing or reproductive toxicity. I know that one thing that I hear often is, well, then why don't we get rid of this crazy law? It seems not to work very well. It seems to put companies at great risk. Just even before we think of that as a route, the only way that this law can be amended is by a 2/3 majority of the legislature, and only to further its purposes, not to reduce its purposes. There is another option, is that we could put it before the people again, another ballot initiative. The likelihood of that seems very, very low in my view and in the view of others that study this subject. There are some exemptions if you are exposing someone to any of these chemicals. If the amount of the chemical is below the safe harbor levels for a carcinogen, the safe harbor is calculated as the NSRL, or no significant risk level. It's the level at which there is less than 1 in 100,000 cases of cancer, assuming that the chemical is consumed at that NSRL for the entire lifetime of an individual. And then the developmental and reproductive toxins, that's the DARTs, there is a maximum allowable dose level, or MADL, and that's determined whatever the level at which you have no observable effect on reproductive harm, divide by 1,000, and that's the level that's allowed to be in a product without a warning. There's also an exemption if you have less than 10 employees. The law only applies to companies with 10 or more employees. There's an exemption for prescription drugs because there's a view that the FDA warnings on prescription drugs preempt the California Proposition 65 warnings. There are also not exactly exemptions, but a general signage that's allowed in restaurants and in fresh produce, so that if I go into the grocery store in Los Angeles, I will see a sign that says, fresh fruits and vegetables may contain chemicals known to the state of California to cause cancer or birth defects, without specifying what those chemicals are. The same as in restaurants. There's a sign in every Starbucks that tells me that the food there, the coffee there, may contain chemicals. That kind of general signage, though, is not allowed for consumer products, for packaged products on the store shelf for sale in health food stores or grocery stores or pharmacies. There's also an exposure exemption if you can show that the chemical in your product is naturally occurring. And a naturally occurring chemical could be, for example, safrole is a listed chemical, but it's present in black pepper, it's present in basil, I don't have to get the safrole out in order to avoid a warning on my black pepper or basil. If I added safrole, then I would have to provide a warning. And then the natural occurrence exemption for chemicals that are naturally accumulated, and these are generally contaminants, they need to, the only way you can show that it's naturally occurring is that if it's not the result of any known human activity, and if it's present only at the lowest level currently feasible. And it's important, this is another point that confuses people when they first become aware of Prop 65, the known human activity goes back multiple generations. This does not mean an action taken by your company. It means if there is a heavy metal in a plant ingredient because there was an industrial revolution, because there's a smokestack upstream, because of any kind of environmental issue, that is not naturally occurring. That portion of the heavy metal in an ingredient is the responsibility of the marketer. This is the warning language, so just so that you have an image of what happens if you do have one of these chemicals in your product, and you have to try to picture this on your health-promoting product, your health-promoting herb or vitamin product, that you would then have to put a warning that says this product contains a chemical known to the state of California to cause cancer or to cause birth defects or other reproductive harm. There is no requirement for this label to be on products that you sell outside of California. So there are companies that will sort their products into those that come to this state and those that go elsewhere, but the warning must be available in any product sold to California, whether in a physical presence or on an internet site that is selling the product to somebody who could purchase it in California. Moving to which kinds of chemicals we have actually encountered over the years in natural health products or dietary supplements. There was a case that was brought in 2005 against 9 defendants for the lovastatin present in their red yeast rice. Lovastatin is a listed chemical, a listed reproductive toxin. The Attorney General of the state of California took over this case as the plaintiff. There was a settlement of $100,000 split by these 9 defendants, so they each paid about $11,000. And they are now required to put pregnancy warnings on their products, and not just simply not for use in pregnancy, but another clause that says because this product could harm the fetus or words to that effect. There was a case brought against greater than 50 defendants in 2005 for progesterone in various creams and gels. This was brought by a private plaintiff. The settlements ranged against these numerous defendants. Some of them were as low as $1,000. That's not meant to be $1. It's $1,000 was about the lowest. I think there was one below that, but one company paid $135,000. If you sell a product in the state of California now with a progesterone as an ingredient, it requires a cancer warning. I believe the effect has been that progesterone is no longer a common ingredient in these kinds of products. A case just a couple years ago against 8 defendants, but it's really been broadened to imply the entire fish oil industry for the PCBs present in fish oil. This was brought by a private plaintiff. The agreement here is not yet final, but there is a draft agreement, a draft settlement that would impose a $125,000 fee to be split by the defendants, and that there would be new limits set for total and dioxin-like PCBs, and the number would be the more conservative of the numbers that have been established as industry standards over the last several years. And then the primary case where this industry has dealt with Proposition 65 is in the presence of heavy metals in these products. And I have here a table of the 4 heavy metals that we've ever encountered: arsenic, cadmium, lead, and mercury. And I want to really gloss over this. I deliberately reduced the size and prominence of all of the numbers except for the MADL, that is the maximum allowable daily level for reproductive toxins for lead, at 0.5 micrograms per day. This is not concentration. This is not parts per million. It's parts per million multiplied times your dosage. So if your herbal product contained 1/2 part per million of lead, at 1 gram, you would reach 1/2 microgram per day. if your herbal product contained 1 part per million lead, you'd get to 0.5 micrograms per day at only 500 milligrams. The arithmetic goes from there. It's a very low level. This is the issue that we have dealt with more than anything else, and that's why I'm emphasizing it on this slide. We have seen some settlements over the years from heavy metals in initially multivitamin and mineral products. Back in 1997, there was a case brought against 6 calcium marketers. The Attorney General took over this case. They did settle with an acknowledgement of some naturally occurring portion of lead in calcium. They established that 1 microgram of lead per gram of calcium could be considered naturally occurring. That gets added to the 0.5 micrograms that's the safe harbor level, the MADL, so the effective limit is 1.5 micrograms for 1,000 milligrams. The settlement was directly applicable only to the settling parties. They split a $300,000 fee, but it became the de facto industry standard, where every company that marketed calcium, whether or not they were one of the 6 named marketers, adopted this level, and it was generally viewed that any calcium product or any product that contained calcium could have this extra amount of lead and not run afoul of the law, even absent a warning label. In 2008, a complaint was filed against 56 companies. This also has been taken over by the Attorney General. It was based on an analysis performed by the Food and Drug Administration at the request of Congressman Henry Waxman, following a publication of information where the issue of lead in multivitamins first arose. And when the FDA published their analysis, within a matter of weeks, a private plaintiff brought this case against, at that time I think it was over 70 companies. The Attorney General decided this was too broad to let it be decided by a private plaintiff, took over the case, released some companies for having fewer than 10 employees was the primary reason. This is not yet settled. There is an understanding that the Attorney General is going to reduce that level from the 1 microgram per gram of calcium to 0.8 micrograms per gram of calcium. The Attorney General has reopened the earlier settlements, gone back to those 6 companies and said, we're going to require you to reduce the level of lead in your calcium products. So this is still ongoing. We have also seen numerous complaints, and 60-day notices is actually the terminology used. That's where a complaint starts, against supplement products over the last 10 years, mostly herbal products. The focus has been on herbal products. It started on traditional Chinese formulas. It's now moved broadly to herbal products. You can see here there were about 141 60-day notices in the 10-year period from 2000 to 2009. The approximation is only because that's the number that we count, but I don't assume that we might not have missed some. Also, there are some cases in which an initial notification will be followed up with a secondary notification from the same plaintiff to the same company. So there is a little bit of overcounting here. Might be a little undercounting, but I think we're actually catching them all. You can see the average is only about 14 per year in that 10-year period. These were all filed by private plaintiffs. Almost all of them alleged presence of lead. A few of them also alleged presence of arsenic, mercury, or cadmium at above the NSRL or MADL. And, of course, they always allege that you're not providing the required clear and reasonable warning. In the last 2 years, both the product category has expanded and the number of notices has expanded. So we're no longer focused. We're seeing Prop 65 notices against not just herbal companies, but also these large serving format products like protein shakes, products where you take a scoop or two. And it's awfully easy to find a 0.5 microgram of lead when you're taking a scoop or two of something that contains whey protein. As you can see here, there were about 274 60-day notices filed in the last 2 years. So we've gone from an average of 14 a year to an average of 137 a year. All but 35 of these have been filed by one single plaintiff. It's the Environmental Research Center, or ERC. This private plaintiff has made it his business to test your products. He is testing pretty much everything in the marketplace. He goes through dozens and dozens of products a month, apparently, because he files numerous 60-day notices every month. He started in March of 2010, and even this month filed several additional notices. All of his complaints allege presence of lead. A very few, have also alleged presence of arsenic. And, of course, again, what he's saying is, and you don't have a warning on your product. There have been a few settlements. They're summarizing the last two slides. In the entire period from 2000 to 2011, there have been 415 60-day notices, resulting in 79 settlements and 22 dismissals. As you can see, that means that there are over 300 that are still not settled. They're still out there. But of the settlements, there were a few of these that have been aberrantly low, a few below $25,000. I think one of them was actually only $1,500, and one of them was $8,600. But it's out of the ordinary for a settlement to be below $25,000. There were two of them that were aberrantly high at about $2.6 million each. These were complex cases. They involved issues besides Proposition 65 and may not be relevant to an understanding of the whole. So if I take both of those out, the aberrant low and the aberrant high, and just take the average of the other 70 settlements, it costs you $90,000 to get a 60-day notice that alleges presence of lead in your product and absence of a warning label. That does not include your own legal expenses. That's the amount that you pay to the plaintiff or the plaintiff's lawyer or to some third party that's been acknowledged as the appropriate recipient of your fines, or you pay it directly to the state in the form of a civil penalty. There have been 8 settlements to date of these cases brought by ERC. The average of those has been about $64,000. The total settlements to date, and this does include those 2 aberrant settlements, which represent about half of it, but nonetheless, this industry has paid over $11 million in the last 12 years to settle these cases. I, again, go back to my opening comments. My primary interest is in calling this to your attention if you're doing business in California. This is a terrible tax on industry. If we've got $1 million a year to spare, I can't help but think that we've got a better way to spend it than paying settlements for failure to warn on low levels of lead in our products. There have also been some details in the settlements that have occurred where they have set some terms. There was acknowledged a naturally occurring level of lead in some of the settlements between 2005 and 2008. You can see the levels here between 2.25 and 3.5 micrograms. Companies agreed that if their product was above, in some cases, 10, in some cases 14 micrograms of lead, they simply would not sell them. The terms established a requirement for extensive and specific testing requirements and also were applicable only to the settling parties. I want to point out on this first line, the plaintiff who agreed to this settlement with these naturally occurring levels has now stated that they will never do that again. I have not seen any settlements in the last several years that establish a somewhat subjectively established naturally occurring or subjectively determined naturally occurring level, which is what happened in these cases. With regard to these recent settlements with ERC, the 8 settlements with ERC, each of these is required a warning. So what they say is if your product contains more than 0.5 microgram of lead, you're going to put that reproductive toxin warning. If it contains more than 15 micrograms, you're going to put the word cancer on your label. They're giving no tolerance for a naturally occurring level. They're requiring that companies at the point of settlement go find products in the marketplace, send stickers to their downstream distributors and get those stickers on the product. They're not waiting for you to start shipping new product. They're also requiring that you provide the testing results to ERC for the next 2-year period. I can summarize this as saying that the settlement includes that the plaintiff is now in your business, and that's something that needs to be considered by all of us as we're planning our strategies in how to deal with this law. I want to close with, these are the options that I think you have to deal with the lead MADL, the maximum allowable daily level, the level below which you do not have to provide a warning for reproductive toxicity, but above which you do, that 0.5 microgram per day. Here's one option. You can discontinue sales in California. California's business is awfully important to a lot of companies. That's not a very realistic option. You can fire all but 9 employees. I'm sure there are days that you'd like to, but it's not really a way that you can run your business. So you're going to be liable for this law if you have more than 9 employees, 10 or more employees. You could try to do the work to establish that all of the lead in your product is naturally occurring. That's very difficult. It's very expensive. In my understanding, the only industry that has been successful in establishing a naturally occurring level of lead is the chocolate industry. This case was brought against a very few companies, the large national brands. They had the financing that was needed. They pooled their resources. The number I've heard is $1 to $2 million, and they were able to go back to a very limited agricultural area where most cocoa is grown, and they had 40 to 60 years of data from those fields. If we have those same kind of criteria for other herbs, if we've got a couple of $1 million and we've got 40 to 60 years of data, maybe we would be successful with other herbs also. It to me is a very unpragmatic approach. It has seldom worked. It's expensive. I think it's not the route that is likely to lead to your establishing your compliance. So the realistic options are the next two, really. It's that you either analyze for lead and show that you have less than 0.5 microgram of lead in every lot, which could include reformulating. You could reduce your dosage. One of the things that Ann talked about is substantiation for your claims. If you reduce your dosage, is your claim substantiation still in place? These are decisions that you'd have to make. And your only other option there is to apply clear and reasonable warnings, to provide a statement that informs consumers of the presence of lead in your product. If you don't do one of those, then what you're really doing, whether you decide to do it or not, is you're waiting to get a 60-day notice. 60-day notice is where the whole process starts. That's where the private plaintiff sends you a letter that says, we've analyzed your product and we found more than 0.5 microgram of lead, therefore you're out of compliance. 60 days later, they file a lawsuit, and then you're moving toward the settlement table, probably with an expensive lawyer in the interim. There is now another option. You can buy insurance. There's an insurance policy. We worked closely with our insurance broker to make sure that it's an errors and omissions policy that has a specific rider that covers Prop 65 complaints. You need to keep in mind that this provides relief only for the financial costs. It does not get the company out of your business. You're still going to have to deal with whatever other terms might be addressed in a settlement, and it is not inexpensive at all. I have heard that it can range in the area of several tens of thousands of dollars per year for the premium for this insurance. I do want to take just a minute here to acknowledge and appreciate a few people that have been very instrumental in both my ongoing understanding of this law and preparation for today's presentation. Trent Norris of the law firm of Arnold & Porter is APA's Proposition 65 counsel. I've learned more from him about this law than anyone. He is a real resource. Merle Zimmerman, APA's information analyst, is responsible for preparing much of the data that I included in this presentation. Merle, I really appreciate the attention that you pay to these details. Dick Griffin with Griffcon Enterprises is our contact for Think Risk Liability Insurance. They're the ones that figured out how to turn standard E&O policy into one that does provide some coverage for Proposition 65. I've included email addresses for each of these persons if you'd like to contact them. And then here's my email address. I stated at the outset that I don't believe that in 12 to 15 minutes you can understand everything about this law. I seriously invite you to contact me if you have any follow-up questions, if you want to understand this better, if you have any suggestions for how we could approach this differently. There are some ongoing conversations. There are some ideas about retail signage as a substitute for on-label warnings. Now, the retailers need to really want to do that, and generally the only two that I've seen do that are doing it for their own brands in their store. The health food stores don't want cancer warnings and reproductive toxin warnings in their stores in a general way. We continue to talk about whether or not we could find some option to a warning that would still be clear and reasonable for products that might contain more than 0.5 microgram of lead, but still would have very low levels in the 2 to 2.5 micrograms of lead per day. If that's what you think your products are, I would love to speak with you about an ongoing idea about trying to modify the kind of warning that would be required for low-level products that are still above the legal limit. I do appreciate your attention very much, and again, I appreciate Dicentra's making this opportunity available to me.
Great. Thank you very much, Michael. I think you did quite well. You gave us a very comprehensive overview in a limited space of time. We do appreciate your comments and your availability for any follow-up.